The massive command center of the Galactic Concordance buzzed with nervous energy as officers from 17 different species hurried between holographic displays, their faces grim. Admiral Tarul, a tall being with pale blue skin and 4 arms, stood motionless before the central projection, showing another red flashing point where a star system had fallen. How many citizens were evacuated? Toril asked quietly. Less than 40%, replied his aide. The swarm arrived 3 days earlier than our models predicted. Toril closed his large, pupilless eyes briefly. This marked the 12th major defeat in 3 years. The swarm, as most species had taken to calling them, had emerged from the dark region beyond the galactic arm without warning or communication. They consumed resources with frightening efficiency, leaving barren worlds in their wake. The Concordance, despite being a coalition of the most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy, found itself outmatched, not in technology or numbers, but in something more fundamental: adaptability. The swarm changed tactics constantly, seeming to evolve new strategies between battles. "Admiral," called a voice from across the command center. "The council is assembled and waiting." Toril straightened his uniform and headed toward the council chambers. The weight of billions of lives rested on what would happen next. The Galactic Council chamber formed a perfect circle, with seats for representatives of all 17 member species. Today, many of those seats were empty, their homeworlds already lost or their representatives unable to travel safely through contested space. "We cannot continue this way," began the Thalosian representative, her crystalline form catching the light. "At current loss rates, the Concordance will collapse within 16 months. Our predictive models are failing," added another counselor. "The swarm's patterns defy our most advanced military algorithms." Tarul stepped forward. "Honored Council, I have served as your military commander for 22 cycles. In that time, I have exhausted every strategic option available to us." He paused, knowing his next words would be controversial. "Except one." A murmur spread through the chamber. "You speak of the humans," said the eldest counselor, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Concordance thousands of years. "Ego, I do," Toril confirmed. The chamber erupted in objections. Humans were troublesome, aggressive, unpredictable. Their planet, Earth, had only achieved limited spaceflight. They were technically part of the Concordance through a provisional defense pact, but had been deliberately kept at the fringes of galactic politics. "They're barely more than primitives," shouted one counselor. "Their primary transportation still burns chemical fuels. They spend more resources on weapons than most of our species combined," noted another more thoughtfully. Toril activated a holographic display in the center of the room. It showed historical footage from Earth, wars spanning centuries, battles across continents. "The humans lack our technology," Toril said quietly as images of Earth's conflicts played out. "But they possess something we desperately need. They understand war in ways we never have. While our civilization spent millennia in peace advancing science and art, humans fought each other constantly. They've developed a creativity in conflict that we cannot match." The council watched silently as the display showed humans fighting across different terrains using primitive but effective tactics. "The swarm behaves like nothing we've encountered," Toril continued. "But humans have fought enemies like themselves. They understand adaptation, deception, and psychological warfare. They grasp concepts that our military doctrines don't even have words for." The eldest counselor leaned forward. "You wish to activate the Defense Pact? Bring humans into a galactic war?" "Not all humans," Toril clarified. "Just their soldiers, their veterans, the ones who understand battle best." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The idea of actively seeking out warriors from a species known for its violent tendencies went against everything the peaceful Concordance stood for. But desperation has a way of changing principles. The alternative, Toril reminded them gently, is extinction. After hours of debate, the vote was taken. By the narrowest margin in Concordance history, the measure passed. A diplomatic vessel would be sent to Earth immediately. As Toril returned to the command center, his aide approached with a data pad. "I've prepared the briefing for the diplomatic team. They'll need to know who to ask for, what type of military assistance to request." Toril took the pad, scrolling through information about Earth's military structure. "We don't need their largest force," he said. "We need their best. Find me the soldiers who have seen the worst battles and survived. The ones who have faced impossible odds and found a way to win." "There's a regiment," his aide noted, highlighting a section of the report. "The 117th. They're considered legendary among humans." Toril read the combat record of the unit and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. "Send the message to Earth," he ordered. "Tell them the Concordance calls for aid under the terms of our treaty, and specify that we request the 117th Regiment." He turned back to the holographic display showing the advancing swarm. "Let's see if humans are as dangerous as their history suggests." As the diplomatic vessel slipped into faster-than-light travel toward the small blue planet, neither Toril nor the Council could have imagined just how dramatically a few hundred human veterans were about to change the course of the war and the future of the galaxy itself. The sleek alien ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, drawing the attention of everyone at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters. It wasn't the first extraterrestrial vessel to visit their planet, but diplomatic calls from the Galactic Concordance were rare enough to cause a stir. Commander Kim stood at the landing pad, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. At 60 years old, he'd spent more than half his life in combat zones across Earth and its colony worlds. The scars along his jawline and the subtle mechanical whir of his prosthetic left hand told stories of battles hard won and comrades lost. Beside him stood the Earth Council representatives dressed in their formal uniforms. They fidgeted nervously as the alien craft settled onto the landing pad with barely a sound. "Remember," whispered one council member, "we need to appear united and strong." Kim almost smiled at that. Appearances hardly mattered now. The briefing he'd received this morning had been clear. The mighty Concordance, the alliance of advanced alien civilizations that had largely ignored humanity except for trade agreements, was losing a war. Badly. The ship's ramp extended, and 3 aliens emerged. Their blue skin shimmered in the morning sunlight as they approached with the fluid grace their species was known for. "Welcome to Earth," said the council chairperson, stepping forward. "I am Chairperson Park, and this is Commander Kim of the 117th Combat Regiment." The lead alien bowed slightly. "I am Ambassador Laurel. The Concordance extends its gratitude for receiving us on such short notice." The formalities continued as they moved inside to the conference room. Kim remained silent, studying the aliens. Despite their composed exteriors, he recognized the subtle signs of exhaustion and defeat, universal across species, it seemed. Once seated at the large conference table, Ambassador Laurel activated a holographic display showing star maps and battle footage. Kim leaned forward, his interest genuinely piqued as images of the enemy appeared. "The swarm," Laurel explained, "emerged 3 years ago. They consume resources at an unprecedented rate, leaving nothing behind. Our military forces have been unable to halt their advance." The council members exchanged worried glances as the scale of the threat became clear. If the technologically superior Concordance couldn't stop this enemy, what chance did humanity have? "And you want our help?" asked Chairperson Park incredulously. "Our technology is centuries behind yours." "We don't seek your technology," Laurel replied, turning to face Kim directly. "We request your soldiers, specifically the 117th Regiment." A murmur ran through the Earth representatives. The 117th was legendary, veterans of the resource wars who had somehow survived the bloodiest conflicts in recent human history. Kim spoke for the first time, his voice deep and steady. "Why us?" Ambassador Laurel touched a control, and the hologram shifted to show Concordance battle formations. Elegant, perfectly symmetrical patterns of ships moving in precise coordination. "Our civilizations evolved without the constant warfare that has shaped human history," Laurel explained. "We fight efficiently, logically." The alien's large eyes blinked slowly. "The swarm doesn't. They adapt, They use tactics we cannot predict or counter with our algorithms. Kim nodded, understanding dawning on his face. You need chaos. Unpredictability. We need humans, Laurel confirmed. Your species understands warfare in ways ours never has. Your history, while troubling to us, has created soldiers with instincts we lack. The conference continued for hours. Details were negotiated, terms agreed upon. By evening, the decision was made. The 117th Regiment would deploy with the Concordance forces as military advisors and combat specialists. 3 days later, Kim stood in the hangar addressing the 300 soldiers of his command. They were not young recruits but battle-hardened veterans, men and women who carried the weight of past wars in their eyes and the skill of survival in their hands. The briefing packets have been distributed, Kim said, pacing before the assembled troops. You've all seen what we're up against. Lee, his second-in-command, stepped forward. Sir, permission to speak freely? Kim nodded. We're talking about an interstellar war against an enemy we've never encountered, fighting alongside aliens who think we're barely civilized. Some of us are wondering, why us? Why not send the active duty forces with the latest equipment? A thoughtful silence fell over the hangar. Kim looked out at the faces watching him, some bearing visible scars, others with the 1,000-yard stare that never truly fades. The Concordance has technology we can barely comprehend, Kim said quietly. They have ships that could destroy our entire fleet without breaking formation. What they don't have is this. He tapped his temple. They don't understand war, not real war. Not the kind where you're outnumbered, outgunned with no good options left, but you still find a way to survive. They've never had to adapt on a battlefield when everything goes wrong. They've never had to trick an enemy who knows all their plans. Kim walked slowly along the line of troops. They requested the 117th specifically because we've done the impossible before. Because every one of you has been in situations where the logical move was to surrender or die, and instead, you found a third option. The soldiers straightened almost imperceptibly. Pride, not the showy kind seen in parades but the quiet confidence of professionals, spread through their ranks. Our equipment is outdated by their standards. Our weapons might as well be sticks and stones compared to theirs. But each of you knows something their advanced AI battle systems don't: how to think like a human being who refuses to lose. Lee nodded slowly, understanding. Pack your gear, Kim concluded. We leave for Concordance Central Command at 0600. And make no mistake, we're not going as advisors or observers. We're going to show these advanced civilizations how humans fight when everything is on the line. As the troops dispersed to prepare, Kim remained in the hangar looking at the enormous Concordance transport vessel waiting to carry them to the stars. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans, so often defined by their capacity for violence, might now save the galaxy because of it. The Concordance battleship Eternal Vigilance was unlike anything the human soldiers had ever seen. Its cavernous war room stretched nearly 100 meters across, with holographic displays showing troop movements and battle scenarios throughout Concordance space. Admiral Torul stood at the center, surrounded by alien officers from various species, all watching with barely concealed skepticism as Commander Kim and his 15 selected veterans studied their tactical displays. This outpost, Kim said, pointing to a pulsing red marker on the holomap, controls swarm communications for this entire sector? Correct, Admiral Torul confirmed. But it's heavily defended. We lost 3 battle groups attempting to breach their perimeter last month. Kim exchanged glances with Lee, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They had both seen the flaws in the Concordance attack patterns immediately: straight-line approaches, predictable formations, no attempt at deception or misdirection. We can take it out, Kim stated flatly. A ripple of disbelief spread through the alien officers. Impossible, said one, a tall reptilian being with scales that shifted color with his emotions, currently a skeptical purple. The facility has automated defense systems that track any approaching vessel larger than a shuttle. Who said anything about using a vessel? Kim asked. Later that day, in a smaller briefing room, Kim laid out his plan to the 15 veterans he'd selected for the mission. They were an unlikely-looking group compared to the sleek uniformed Concordance officers, older humans with weathered faces and practical, worn equipment they'd brought from Earth. The swarm base is located here, Kim explained, using a simple, projected map rather than the fancy holograms. Their sensors are calibrated to detect Concordance energy signatures and ship configurations. They've never encountered humans before. So we're the surprise package, announced CO, a demolitions expert who had lost her right eye in the Indonesian campaign years earlier. Her replacement was functional but deliberately mismatched, green instead of her natural brown. A reminder, she always said, to never make the same mistake twice. Exactly, Kim confirmed. We'll use a captured swarm supply ship the Concordance seized last month. Their techs have studied it, but haven't figured out how to bypass the security protocols. That's where Park comes in. All eyes turned to Park, a quiet man who had specialized in signal intelligence during Earth's resource wars. His unassuming appearance belied one of the most brilliant hacking minds in Earth's military. Their systems are alien, but still follow. Basic computational logic, Park said with a shrug. I can get us in. Once inside, Kim continued, we split into 3 teams. Park's team disables communications, CO's team plants explosives at these structural weak points, and my team creates a diversion to keep their forces occupied. What kind of resistance are we expecting? Asked Choi, checking the ammunition. For his rifle, a weapon that would look primitive to the Concordance but had proven reliable in countless Earthside conflicts. Unknown, Kim admitted. The Concordance has never managed to get operatives inside a swarm facility. We'll be the first. The room fell silent as the reality of their mission sank in. They would be the first humans to engage the swarm directly, an enemy that had decimated the far more advanced Concordance forces. Any questions? Kim asked. Just one, Lee said quietly. When do we leave? The captured swarm vessel was ugly and utilitarian, all sharp angles and mottled gray-green surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The 15 humans boarded with minimal equipment, weapons, explosives, communications gear, and not much else. Admiral Toril watched from the hangar bay as final preparations were made. This is a mistake, said his second-in-command. Sending primitives against our most dangerous enemy? They'll be killed immediately. Toril wasn't so sure. Something about the calm confidence of the human veterans unsettled him. They didn't move. Like his troops, there was a predatory economy to their movements, a readiness he rarely saw among the Concordance forces. Commander Kim, he called out as the humans prepared to board. The Concordance appreciates your enthusiasm, but understand, there is no dishonor in aborting the mission if you encounter overwhelming opposition. Kim paused at the entrance to the ship. With all due respect, Admiral, overwhelming opposition is where we work best. With a nod, he disappeared into the vessel. The journey to the swarm outpost took 13 hours through subspace. The humans spent the time checking equipment, reviewing the limited intelligence available, and resting. A skill veteran soldiers mastered early. Sleep when you can, because you never know when you'll get another chance. As they approached the massive swarm facility, a twisted structure of metal and organic components wrapped around a small moon, Park went to work on the ship's communication systems. Sending approach codes now, he murmured, fingers dancing across the alien interface he'd modified to accept human inputs. And we're clear. They think we're a routine supply delivery. The stolen ship docked without incident, locking onto one of the many ports extending from the facility like skeletal fingers. The humans moved silently into the station, splitting into their assigned teams. What they found inside defied expectation. The swarm, it turned out, were not the insectoid creatures the Concordance had hypothesized. They were something far stranger, beings of semi-solid matter that flowed through their own structures, merging with technology in ways that blurred the line between organism and machine. Stay focused, Kim whispered as they moved through pulsing corridors where walls occasionally rippled with what appeared to be muscular contractions. Park, how long do you need? 10 minutes at the central node, Park replied, consulting his Scanner. But we need to hurry. They'll detect our biological signatures eventually. The teams moved with practiced precision through the alien facility. When they encountered swarm drones, mindless workers that maintained the station, they eliminated them silently with blade weapons rather than risking gunfire. At the communications hub, Park worked feverishly while the others stood guard. SEOs. Team reported successful placement of explosives at key structural points. Everything was going according to plan. Until it wasn't. We've been made. Lee's voice crackled over the comm. Enemy forces converging on your position, Commander. Kim glanced at Park. How much longer? 2 minutes, Park answered, not looking up from the alien console where he was implanting a virus designed to spread through the swarm's network. We don't have 2 minutes, Kim decided, hearing the approaching sounds of swarm defenders. New plan, Lee, execute Scenario 3. Over the comm, Lee's voice betrayed surprise but no hesitation. Understood. Scenario 3 confirmed. It was a contingency they had developed during the journey, a high-risk maneuver they'd used during the Shanghai conflict years before. Instead of trying to complete the mission undetected, they would deliberately draw attention, creating chaos throughout the facility while a minimal team completed the objective. As swarm defenders closed in on the communications hub, Kim and 3 others moved to intercept them in the corridor, weapons ready. The fight that followed was brutal and disorienting. The swarm entities moved in ways no human opponent ever had, flowing through cracks in the walls and reconstituting themselves behind the human soldiers. But the veterans adapted quickly, identifying patterns in the seemingly random attacks. They fought with the improvisation and grim determination that had kept them alive through Earth's worst conflicts. Done, Park called finally. Virus uploaded. Their entire communication network will collapse in 30 seconds. All teams, fall. Back to extraction point, Kim ordered, firing his weapon to cover their retreat. SEO, trigger the charges on my mark. The humans withdrew in careful stages, covering each other's movements with disciplined precision. As they reached the docking bay and their stolen ship, Kim gave the order. Now. The explosions ripped through the facility in a carefully orchestrated sequence, targeting structural weaknesses the Concordance had never identified. The humans launched away from the disintegrating station as swarm ships scrambled in confusion, unable to coordinate their response as their communication network collapsed. Hours later, back aboard the Eternal Vigilance, Admiral Tarul stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. The swarm outpost, a facility his forces had failed to neutralize despite multiple large-scale assaults, was nothing but debris floating in space. More importantly, swarm forces across 3 star systems were in disarray, unable to coordinate their movements. How? He finally asked, turning to face Kim and his team, who stood calmly at the back of the war room. Kim shrugged slightly. We saw what your forces couldn't. You attacked where they were strongest. We found where they were vulnerable. The human veterans stood quietly, their expressions revealing nothing. They weren't celebrating or boasting about their victory. For them, this was just another mission completed. Admiral Toro looked at these aging humans with their primitive weapons and realized with sudden clarity that the Concordance had greatly underestimated humanity's most valuable resource, not their technology or their numbers, but their intimate understanding of warfare itself. Commander Kim, Tarul said formally, the Concordance would like to request your assistance in revising our combat doctrine. A small smile touched Kim's weathered face. That's why we're here, Admiral. The real fight is just beginning. The massive training hall aboard the Concordance flagship echoed with the sounds of confusion and frustration. 200 alien officers from 17 different species stood in loose formations, watching as Commander Lee paced before them. Unlike Commander Kim, who was now locked in strategic planning with Admiral Tarul, Lee had been tasked with something, perhaps more difficult, teaching aliens how to think like human soldiers. Again, Lee said patiently, your formations are too predictable. Look at the simulation. He gestured to the holographic display showing the previous day's combat exercise. The Concordance units moved in perfect geometric patterns, beautiful, to watch but utterly lacking in tactical surprise. In a perfect universe, perfect formations would win battles, Lee continued. But war isn't perfect. War is messy. War is chaos. And in chaos, the side that adapts faster wins. A tall, willowy alien with iridescent skin raised a four-fingered hand. But our battle algorithms are designed to create optimal attack patterns based on thousands of variables. How can unpredictability be more effective than mathematical precision? Lee smiled slightly. This was the fundamental disconnect he'd been trying to bridge for the past week. The concordant species had evolved without the constant warfare that had shaped human history. They approached combat like a complex equation to be solved, rather than the bloody, chaotic struggle humans knew it to be. Computer, Lee called out, run historical simulation Earth 7. The hologram shifted to show footage from the Battle of Thermopylae, where a small force of Greeks had held off a vastly larger Persian army by using terrain to their advantage. This battle happened over 3,000 years ago on Earth, Lee explained. These soldiers had no computers, no algorithms, just spears, shields, and an understanding of one simple truth. Sometimes the mathematically inferior position is the tactically superior one. He walked through the alien officers, making eye contact with as many as he could. The swarm doesn't fight according to your mathematical models. That's why they're winning. They adapt, they evolve their tactics, they do the unexpected. If we're going to beat them, we need to do the same. In another section of the massive ship, Engineer Park stood inside an alien vessel's engine room, surrounded by curious concordance technicians. The sleek, almost artistic design of their propulsion systems contrasted sharply with the modifications Park and his team were implementing. This disrupts the ship's energy signature, Park explained, pointing to a device his team had cobbled, together from concordance components. Makes you harder to detect on swarm sensors. But it reduces engine efficiency by 12%, protested one technician, their antenna twitching with distress. Would you rather be 12% slower or 100% dead? Park asked bluntly. When the alien didn't respond, he continued, in the resource wars, we learned that survival often means sacrificing optimal performance for tactical advantage. Elsewhere, in what had been converted to a makeshift workshop, Engineer Choi supervised the modification of Concordance weapons systems. Her team had discovered that the swarm entities were surprisingly vulnerable to certain radiation frequencies that the Concordance had never thought to weaponize. Your weapons are designed to be lethal but humane, Choi explained to the weapons officer watching her work with obvious concern. That's admirable, but the swarm doesn't care about humane. They don't surrender. They don't retreat unless it's tactical, and they certainly don't show mercy. She connected the final components of the modified rifle. This will disrupt their neural patterns at a fundamental level. It's not pretty, but it works. The weapons officer's translucent skin darkened with emotion. This seems excessive. Choi looked up from her work, her expression serious. War isn't about excess or restraint. It's about winning before the enemy destroys everything you care about. On Earth, we learned that lesson the hard way. Meanwhile, in the Strategic Command Center, Commander Kim stood with Admiral Toril and the highest-ranking Concordance officials, reviewing the implementation of what they had begun calling the human way of war. The holographic display showed dozens of modified Concordance vessels, now moving in seemingly erratic patterns, conducting randomized patrol routes that the swarm couldn't easily predict. Other ships had been equipped with the stealth modifications Park's team developed, making them virtually invisible to enemy sensors. The swarm is adapting, noted one official, pointing to areas where enemy forces had altered their usual patterns. They're learning our new tactics. Good, Kim said, surprising everyone in the room. That's exactly what we want. You want them to counter our strategies? Admiral Turrell asked, confusion evident in his voice. Kim nodded. When your opponent adapts to your tactics, they're playing your game. They're thinking about what you might do next, trying to predict your moves. He manipulated the holographic controls, highlighting several key star systems. And while they're focused on countering what they think we're doing, he expanded. the display to show a small task force of modified concordance ships slipping through a gap in the swarm defenses. A gap that hadn't existed until the swarm shifted their forces to counter the more visible threat. We hit them where they're not looking. Admiral Tyrrell studied the simulation, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. Deception. You're teaching us to use deception as a primary strategy. Deception, adaptation, psychological warfare, Kim confirmed. These concepts aren't in your military doctrine, but they've been central to human conflicts for thousands of years. One of the older council members who had been observing in silence finally spoke. Your species developed these strategies fighting against yourselves. Do you not find that troubling? Kim considered the question carefully. It cut to the heart of the fundamental difference between humans and the concordant species. History of warfare isn't something we're proud of, he admitted, but it gave us something valuable, an understanding that combat isn't just about who has the better technology or the larger numbers. It's about who can think differently when everything goes wrong. He gestured to the display showing the modified concordance forces now implementing human tactics. Your civilizations evolved through cooperation, advancing together. That gave you technological and cultural achievements we can barely imagine. But humans evolved through constant challenge and conflict. That gave us something you lack, the instinct to survive against all odds. A tense silence fell over the command center. Some of the alien officials seemed uncomfortable with the implications of Kim's words, while others showed signs of thoughtful consideration. Admiral Tyrrell broke the silence. The Proxima Centauri gateway will be the test. The swarm is massing forces for a major offensive there in 3 days. If your human way of war is effective, we'll know soon enough. Kim nodded gravely. Have your ship commanders reviewed the tactical scenarios we prepared? They have, Tyrrell confirmed, though many find them unsettling. Particularly, the concept you call baiting the enemy. It goes against your nature, Kim acknowledged. The concordance was founded on principles of directness and honesty, but war requires a different mindset. He looked around at the assembled alien leaders, seeing their doubt, their hesitation to embrace methods so contrary to their civilized values. I know what you're thinking, Kim said quietly. That adopting human tactics means becoming more like us, more aggressive, more deceptive. But remember this, we're not teaching you these methods so you can conquer. We're teaching you so you can protect. Sometimes the most peaceful civilizations must learn the art of war to preserve that peace. As the meeting concluded, and preparations continued for the coming battle, Admiral Tyrrell pulled Kim aside. Commander, there's something I've been meaning to ask, the alien said, his voice low. Your soldiers, they've seen terrible things, done terrible things in their wars, yet they seem at peace with themselves. How is this possible? Kim looked out through the viewport at the stars beyond, thinking of all the battles he and his veterans had survived, all the comrades they had lost. We're not at peace with what we've done, Admiral, he finally answered. We've just learned to live with it. And now, perhaps, we've found a way to use those hard-earned skills for something unquestionably good, protecting your people from extinction. He turned back to the alien commander. Sometimes the best redemption for a warrior isn't laying down their weapons, but finding the right cause to fight for. The ship's alert system sounded, indicating the fleet was preparing to move into position for the coming battle. Both commanders turned toward the duty stations without another word, each carrying the weight of billions of lives depending on the success of their unlikely alliance. The command bridge of the Concordance flagship unbending, truth had been transformed. Where once neat rows of control stations had been arranged in perfect geometric patterns, now organized chaos reigned. Human veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with alien officers, pointing at tactical displays and speaking in the shorthand of soldiers who had come to understand each other through shared battle. Commander Kim studied the massive holographic projection showing the Orion sector, the stage for what would likely be the decisive confrontation of the war. The swarm had committed nearly 70% of their forces to this region, determined to crush the sudden resistance that had disrupted their previously unstoppable advance. They've taken the bait, Kim observed quietly as Admiral Toril joined him. The alien commander's normally blue skin had paled with stress in recent days, but there was a new steadiness in his four-armed stance. The Queen Consciousness has recognized the threat your people represent. Our intelligence indicates she has personally taken control of this offensive. Kim nodded, unsurprised. Adaptive intelligences always have a central node, a primary consciousness, that directs the whole. We've forced her to show herself, at the cost of appearing vulnerable, Toril noted, gesturing to the holographic display where Concordance forces seemed scattered and disorganized across multiple star systems. To an observer, particularly a swarm observer, it would appear that the alien alliance was fracturing under pressure. Appearing vulnerable and being vulnerable are two different things, Kim replied with the hint of a smile. Is everyone in position? Toril confirmed with a gesture, bringing up status indicators. From across the sector, all commanders report ready. The modified vessels are in place, the new weapons have been distributed. He hesitated. Are you certain this will work? We are risking everything on this strategy. Kim's weathered face showed no doubt. In every war I've fought, there comes a moment when you have to commit fully. Put everything on the line for one decisive action. He looked around at the bridge, where human veterans had been integrated into every critical station. But we're not just relying on a plan, we're relying on people who know how to adapt when plans fail. Across the Orion sector, human veterans, who had once fought in Earth's bloodiest conflicts, now prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of 17 alien civilizations. Each had been assigned to a different Concordance vessel, serving as tactical advisors to alien commanders who had reluctantly embraced human methods of warfare. Aboard the light cruiser Swift Judgment, Engineer Park monitored the stealth systems his team had developed. The ship was currently hidden in the shadow of a small moon, waiting for the signal to strike at the swarm's vulnerable supply lines. They still don't see us? Asked the ship's captain, a tall insectoid being whose compound eyes shifted nervously between readouts. They don't see any of us, Park confirmed, checking the network of similarly hidden vessels scattered throughout the sector. Not until we want them to. On the battle carrier Resolute Guardian, Commander Lee stood beside Captain Morrow, a crystalline entity whose transparent body refracted light in complex patterns. They watched as the massive swarm armada approached their position. They're moving faster than anticipated, Morrow observed, crystal facets flickering with concern. Should we adjust our formation? Lee shook his head. No. Let them think they've caught us unprepared. The more confident they are, the harder they'll fall for the trap. Aboard the destroyer. Unwavering principle. Engineer Choi made final adjustments to the ship's newly modified weapon systems. The vessel had been designated as part of the hammer that would strike once the swarm forces were fully committed. Testing. Complete, she reported to the ship's commander. Radiation modulators at full capacity. They'll never know what hit them. The alien commander, a being of living metal whose body rippled with unease, studied the human with newfound respect. Your species, you've lived with the reality of war for so long. How do you maintain hope in the face of such constant conflict? Choi paused in her work, considering the question. Maybe it's because we've seen the worst that can happen and we're still here, still fighting. She secured her tools and moved to her battle station. Besides, the alternative to hope is surrender, and humans don't surrender easily. The battle began with a feint, a seemingly desperate attack by a small group of Concordance vessels against the swarm's forward elements. The enemy responded predictably, pressing what they perceived as an advantage, pushing deeper into the Yaom sector where the Concordance forces appeared to be in disarray. From his position on the flagship, Kim watched as the swarm committed more and more of their forces, drawn by the apparent opportunity to deliver a killing blow to the fragmented Concordance fleet. They're fully engaged, reported a sensor officer. The Queen Consciousness vessel has moved into the tertiary position as predicted. Kim exchanged glances with Admiral Toril. This was the moment they had planned for, the point of maximum commitment by the enemy, when their forces were fully extended and focused entirely on the targets before them. All ships, Kim ordered, his voice calm despite the stakes. Execute Thermopylae Protocol. Across the sector, the hidden concordance vessels emerged from their concealment, not in the elegant, symmetrical formations they had once favored, but in seemingly chaotic patterns designed to create maximum confusion. Ships that the swarm had dismissed as crippled or retreating suddenly reversed course. Others appeared from the blind spots in swarm sensor coverage. In moments, the hunters became the hunted as the concordance forces executed a massive encirclement maneuver. The swarm found themselves surrounded, their communication networks disrupted by precisely targeted strikes from vessels using Park's stealth technology. "They're attempting to regroup," reported a tactical officer, pointing to areas where swarm vessels were trying to form defensive clusters. "Now we show them what human weapons development looks like," Kim said, nodding to Admiral Toril. The Admiral gave the command, and across the battlefield the modified weapon systems activated. Beams of precisely modulated radiation struck the swarm vessels, disrupting the neural patterns that allowed their semi-organic technology to function. Ships began to drift, their crews temporarily paralyzed by the unfamiliar attack. "The Queen Consciousness vessel is attempting to withdraw," announced the sensor officer, highlighting a massive structure at the heart of the swarm formation. "They're opening an escape vector." "Not today," Kim said, signaling to a previously hidden group of fast attack craft. These ships, commanded by the most experienced human veterans, surged forward in an intercept course that no traditional concordance commander would have attempted. A high-risk, high-reward maneuver threading through enemy fire to strike at the heart of the swarm leadership. The bridge fell silent as everyone watched the desperate gambit unfold. Several of the attacking vessels were hit, disappearing in bursts of light as swarm defenses found their marks. But enough got through. Their modified weapons focused on the Queen Consciousness vessel's propulsion systems. The massive swarm ship slowed, then stopped, unable to escape the closing net of concordance forces. "We have them," Admiral Toril said, in disbelief. "We actually have them." The battle continued for several more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Without the direct guidance of the Queen Consciousness, the swarm forces lost their adaptive edge. Individual vessels fought on, but the coordinated strategy that had made them so formidable was gone. By the time the final swarm ship had been neutralized or driven into retreat, the scale of the victory became clear. Not only had they dealt the enemy a devastating defeat, but they had captured the Queen Consciousness vessel intact, a treasure trove of intelligence that would help them understand and counter the swarm throughout the galaxy. In the aftermath, as damage reports and casualty counts came in, Kim found himself standing alone at a viewport, watching the debris field that had once been a fearsome enemy armada. Admiral Toril joined him, his normally rigid posture now relaxed in the aftermath of victory. "The Council has requested your presence," the Admiral said. "They wish to express their gratitude. There is talk of a permanent alliance between Earth and the Concordance." Kim nodded absently, his thoughts not on politics or alliances, but on the human veterans who had given their lives in this battle far from home. "We didn't come here for gratitude, Admiral." "I know," Toril replied softly. "You came because fighting is what you know." He hesitated, then added, "But perhaps that is not all you are." Kim turned to face the alien commander. "What do you mean?" "Before your arrival, I believed humans were dangerous because of your capacity for violence," Toril explained. "Now I understand you are formidable because of your capacity for adaptation, for finding hope in hopeless situations, for turning defeat into victory through sheer refusal to accept the inevitable." Kim smiled faintly. "Those aren't separate from our violent history, Admiral. They're born from it. Every skill we brought to this war, we learned through centuries of fighting each other. And yet," Toril observed, "when given the chance to fight for something larger than yourselves, to protect civilizations not your own, you did so without hesitation." A message chimed on Kim's communicator. More human soldiers were arriving. From Earth, not just veterans now, but active duty forces equipped with weapons and technology modified specifically for fighting the swarm. The tide had truly turned. "Perhaps," Admiral Toril continued, What makes humans dangerous also makes you invaluable allies. You understand conflict in ways we never could, but you also understand its cost in ways we're only beginning to grasp. As they walked together, toward the shuttle that would take them to the council meeting, Kim thought about the veterans under his command. Men and women who had seen the worst of humanity's wars now using those hard-earned skills to protect alien civilizations they had never known existed until recently. "You know what's ironic, Admiral?" Kim said as they boarded the shuttle. "Many of us joined Earth's military hoping to bring peace through strength. We never imagined we'd actually find that peace among the stars." Toral's skin rippled with what Kim had learned was the alien equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "And we of the Concordance never imagined that the species we most feared for your warlike nature would become our greatest defenders in our darkest hour." The shuttle departed, carrying them toward a future where the unlikely alliance between peaceful aliens and veteran human soldiers would reshape the galaxy. A future where the skills forged in Earth's conflicts would find purpose in protecting peace across the stars.